Hello, and welcome to Wired for Change. I'm your host, Amy Yee. Today, I'd like to talk about something that is about setting the conditions for success for Canada's business and innovators. In today's political and economic climate, we've got a lot going on, and many are calling for action, concrete policy change that can really support Canadian business and innovators, and highlighting that we can't just rely on some of the old sort of strategies that we've had, relying on raw materials export, for example, and need to start to turn to looking at a lot of the world-class innovation that's already taking place in Canada and Ontario. We've got AI and cybersecurity and clean tech and health tech and so many great things. How do we support the scale and spread of that innovation that will really take us to the world stage and help build economic resilience for us as a nation? Today I'm here with Skaidra Puodžiūnas.
Yes.
I'm so
Great.
sorry.
No, it's brilliant. You got my first name, and that's great. You need the second one. It's fine.
You're from the Canadian Council for Innovation, and I want to talk about that a little bit, Skaidra. I'm so happy to have you here today because you guys are really at the forefront of so much that is happening now, providing a voice to lots of business here in Ontario and in Canada. And I'm following you very closely on LinkedIn and other channels as well. So thank you for being here with us today.
No, thank you so much, and really looking forward to kind of diving in and sharing some resources that hopefully folks can tune into after this podcast.
Amazing. Maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about the Canadian Council for Innovators.
Yeah. So it's the Council of Canadian Innovators, but that's I really do. Everyone gets us on that, and I really do think we should have led with Canadian. So it's confusing for me too.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we are approaching 10 years now in the fall, and what started as a group of CEOs coming together, recognizing that there was an opportunity to have a unified domestic voice to Ottawa, and noticing that some of the tax incentives and some of the initiatives that were coming out maybe weren't going to be as beneficial to homegrown innovators. And so this voice and this collective actually gained a lot of momentum, and there was really an opportunity to kind of grow this collective over the years. And to this day, we actually have over 160 companies nationwide. And at the helm of our organization, our chair is Jim Balsillie, who is no stranger to growing a really prominent, successful Canadian headquartered technology company, BlackBerry, and Research in Motion, as it's become known, as well as our co-chair, John Ruffalo, who is a very active and prominent voice in the venture capital ecosystem, being at the helm of Omer's Ventures and now having Mavericks Private Equity under his leadership too. And so these two leaders coming together and really recognizing that there was an opportunity to have a stronger presence of innovators that are headquartered across the country, no longer startups. So many of them have surpassed their Series A funding, typically have more than 10 employees, growing beyond the kitchen table. But that next level of support that government can provide them looks very different when you get to this, this new stage of growth. And so what could government's role be in ensuring that they stay headquartered in Canada and that they continue to grow, and that maybe we have more BlackBerries, that we have the next wave of great innovation that is powered by Canada. And so hence the evolution and growth and continued relevance of a group called the Council of Canadian Innovators.
And I'm going to get that right eventually.
Yeah.
I love this. I can relate so well to it because one of my first big experiences coming out of school was actually in venture capital, working for Andrew Waitman, and I learned so much from him. And we spent a lot of time sort of thinking about what makes Canada great and what makes our ecosystem great here in Canada for entrepreneurs, and working with the portfolio companies that we had and raising money and thinking about how to make them successful and how to raise more money to invest in Canadian companies as well. It was a fabulous experience, and so many things need to come together. So when you say that, how do we support those innovators more, that really, I really get that. And then the other thing is just, it's so wonderful to see, some of our most successful entrepreneurs go on to look at, from a nationwide perspective, how do we support everyone and kind of bring that value that Canada has to offer out, and how do we support that in other ways? So I love the idea behind the Council for Canadian Innovators. Did I get that right?
You got it
this time?
right.
Thank
You got it right. No, and exactly. And what's really been interesting about our group is that we are like technology or industry sector rather agnostic. So we have med tech companies, clean tech companies, fintech companies, cyber technology companies, a vast cross section of innovation companies, but really at the core, they are all, they have nuanced needs and of course different considerations, but ultimately to get to that next stage of growth, they need support with access to capital, customers, and talent. Mm-hmm. And those are really the sort of guiding principles, the guiding verticals of our advocacy work. So, unlike a chamber of commerce, we are in many ways sort of like the 21st century chamber of commerce, but we also at the helm of our work is advocacy, and we are really trying to help both provincial and federal governments across Canada. Well, there's only one federal government, but the many provincial governments across Canada, I have colleagues, stationed across the country, really try to reorient policy frameworks for the digital age and really try to, help governments understand what's in their backyard, what innovation is in their backyard, and understand the role that they have to play when it comes to thinking about tax reform, thinking about, granting agencies, thinking about setting the parameters for VC funding and working, with VCs and the capital ecosystem, and procurement, thinking about their position as a buyer, that big fun, nebulous word called procurement, but really that purchase order, that customer retention is really, really what is so significant for our companies, particularly now as we are, very much in a trade war with our, at one point, closest ally down south. And so the question is, how does Canada truly buy Canadian and also ensure that we're never in this moment again, ensure that we have the right policy frameworks, the right regulation in place so that we can actually continue to support our Canadian innovators.
So that was a terrific segue into procurement. But just before we get there, I do want to step back a bit and just understand your role as well for our viewers. So what is your role within CCI and how did you get there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Classic me, jumping ahead to only go back. So before joining CCI, I was actually working as a bureaucrat. So I was working as a public servant in the Ontario government, and I had an incredible experience working in the Ontario government. I had the privilege of working in a space that really felt like a startup within the government. It was called the Ontario Digital Service. It no longer exists in its current state, but really the mission behind this unit was to try to help government teams work better in the digital age and try to build systems like our flagship Ontario.ca platform so that people, citizens could actually access government beyond 9 to 5 hours. What does that 3 a.m. government look like? What does a government look like that's reliable outside of, Service Ontario hours? And building a very reliable and plain language and accessible flagship website is so paramount in this moment. I mean, of course, like everything exists to be eventually put online, but there's so much that goes into that, from the data considerations, from standards, from user testing, and really bringing these capabilities into government still was a quite a new concept, quite a new idea. And even now, there's a lot of questions around how to do that effectively, but really it was about building capacity in government. Mm-hmm. And, I really felt like, wow, this is exciting. Our teams are being asked to speak at all these conferences and we're making all these connections with global civil service teams. And wow, this is exciting. But I really was genuinely curious about making that connection to industry, because I noticed that even though, we were doing such a great job building capacity, a lot of the technology vendors we were working with were not always Canadian companies. And, I also felt like COVID was a really interesting moment where a lot of the framework for the COVID tracking system was basically being built on the brinks of Apple and Google. They owned the framework. They owned the infrastructure that a lot of critical health data would then be placed on. And it made me as a citizen, let alone a civil servant, really question what is the role of monopolization in our government infrastructure and technology, and how could I better position myself moving forward to understand and unpack that problem? And so I saw this posting, and I was, wrapping up an interesting tenor within the Ontario government in the IT department. And I was like, this could be interesting. This group is asking provocative questions, awkward questions, but I think the right questions. And so I applied for it, and I didn't realize that I would be the registered lobbyist. I thought I'd be supporting my team in lobbying. But so that's been an interesting transition, going from, bureaucrat to being a registered lobbyist. But I really see that as a tool for advocacy, and I'm always transparent about the fact that, yes, I am a lobbyist, but at the core of the work we're doing is advocacy and change making. And I actually think I'm a well-positioned lobbyist because I understand the pain of being in bureaucracy in this moment and how the system actually works, where the incentive models are in place, how hardworking, government employees are, but how sometimes the structures in place don't always allow for that nimble relationship. And then, translating that to some of the most hardworking entrepreneurs in Canada, like that is the work, trying to build those relationships, those connections, and then trying to take the experiences of entrepreneurs and then bringing it back to the political class and government, as well as the bureaucratic class, and having everyone work together. So the mission continues, but it just sort of takes a different form, and I'm sort of approaching it, I would say, from a different vantage point. So it's been an interesting experience getting here, and now that I am here, really, again, it's translating. My role is ultimately being a voice for Ontario headquartered companies at the core. Although we're a national organization, I'm focused more on the province of Ontario. So it looks like, responding to pre-budgets, consultations when it comes to specific policies, whether it's like AI regulation or cybersecurity related, or something like getting innovation into our healthcare system, and how might we do that in a sustainable way, and what are some of the pain points that our companies are facing, and how do we actually work with government to create a sustainable solution. And it's totally fascinating, and it can lead you in a multitude of directions. And so I think I would also just say the biggest challenging point is knowing what to focus on and being really intentional about what we as an organization will put our energy towards and what makes sense. And I think, just having that, really being the biggest advocates for Canadian owned and Canadian driven innovation, I think is really at the core of what we're trying to do. And I'm just trying to do that from my vantage point in the province.
It's a great vantage point. I love your background, being inside the government, to driving change from there. And I think that's part of what makes you such an effective bridge for the kind of change that you're looking to create. So congrats on that. And you seem like someone who is really where they should be. And so lucky for everyone. I think. So, when you talk about focused, change and specific actions, I know that CCI recently made a list of 8 kind of recommendations to the federal government to consider moving forward. One of those recommendations was about using government procurement to drive innovation. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what's behind that. And you've alluded to it a little bit already. Yeah, for sure. And just, to give listeners some context, so we are entering an election, federally, and we just wrapped an election provincially in the province of Ontario. And so what we've been trying to do is create accessible, shareable documents around what Canadian innovators need to scale, as simple as that. And eight of those recommendations exist online. And so exactly one of them being, really focused on procurement. And again, procurement is this really weird word. As I even talk with my friends who are not working in this world that I'm in, as simply put, it's about exploring government's buying power. And it's one of those things where it seems so obvious. Why wouldn't government spend more dollars on Canadian businesses, Canadian innovation? And I think we've come to a point in society where it just sometimes is easier to go with a certain company because they're being presented as a cheaper option, or they've been around for 10 plus years. They're doing a decent job. Why would we make the effort to sort of change course or to explore a different option?
And, you do enough of this in different sectors, particularly when government does enough of this, you end up with what we're seeing more and more now is monopolistic tendencies. These big organizations just taking up entire ownership of particular sectors. And, if we look at healthcare as an example, there's such an opportunity to open up innovation and open up problem solving with companies that are so invested in the local communities that they would be serving. But there are such barriers to entry. Oftentimes, innovation in the province of Ontario, speaking in healthcare, is limited to two pathways. You're either given a little bit of funding to run a little pilot project, and then hopefully it goes somewhere. But then you're, even at the end of that pilot project, asked to resubmit into this very convoluted and confusing vendor of record system, a VOR system, which doesn't really favor a new entry. So those who have had success with being in the system are almost favored. The incumbent is favored in that process. The other option is getting grants, or getting a little bit of funding here to experiment with something and hoping that it leads to something more. But again, the system isn't always thinking about actually incentivizing innovative ideas. It's the system is created to favor the cheapest idea. And at the core, that seems like a good idea. Our healthcare system is on the brinks. We should go with the cheapest option. We've been working with XYZ company for 10 years. Why would we change anything? And what we're noticing is that the risk of not innovating is actually greater than the risk of, being apathetic. We have to take that innovation. We have to take that change. Otherwise, we will continue to support systems that aren't really leading to the outcomes that we're looking to drive. And I think that kind of goes into the importance of also thinking about not just the price of something, but the outcomes that we're looking to drive. And it's so important from a healthcare perspective. And we just have so many companies, in the med tech space, as an example, that have such phenomenal innovations that are ready to go. And they're also getting purchase orders. So they're being procured, they're being bought by governments outside of Canada. So the irony is they're doing a fantastic job getting visibility and traction in other governments, but our own government can't seem to maybe create a process or create an entry point for them. And so oftentimes they leave, they leave the country. And yeah, sure, on, maybe on a quick examination, it's that's just how business goes, mergers and acquisitions, people leave and come. But I think who really, really suffers are patients, citizens, and ultimately when you buy from a local company, a local innovator, they are invested in that community. And so what you're doing is not just not buying that innovation, but the jobs that are being created might not be as high value, they might not be as long-term, and the solutions themselves might be mediocre at best. And then that vendor, that big vendor that's been there for 10, 15 years, there's no incentive for them to change the model. And so we're really left in this very unfortunate circumstance unless we really think about our opportunity to reinvent the system. And so it doesn't happen overnight, of course, but one true avenue to do that is to really think about how government buys innovation and technology. Government is also historically really good at buying staplers and infrastructure, things that are very tangible, things that you can see, things that are very clearly buy this, it's cheaper, it's more, it's more durable, this makes sense. But when it comes to innovation, there's a few more considerations. You have to think about where data is living. You have to think about concept of systems talking to each other, interoperability, which is really just systems, connecting in with each other. And so I appreciate that it's not as straightforward, but at the same time, this is also not a new concept, and other governments are doing this quite well. And so I do think this is Canada's moment to wake up and take some inspiration from other jurisdictions and welcome their offices to the local innovators that are here more and more.
Thank you for positioning so many of those points really well, Skaidra, I think. There is a lot of friction for innovators in Canada, especially if we don't have the buying power to impact them. Having been in a procure kind of position, and having looked at from a technology perspective, looking at, I've got this startup, and in my heart of hearts,
Yeah,
I want to go
yeah.
with the Canadian option. But, maybe they haven't been funded enough to be able to meet the regulatory requirements that I need to meet, in Canada. And maybe it's more effective for them to meet the regulatory requirements, somewhere else, kind of thing, right? Because they haven't had that investment. And so I want to procure them, but I can't. And now I'm looking at companies or options that are outside of the country. And that's just one example of kind of the friction or the barriers to acquiring them. And so how can we change that for them and make them more successful? Because as a company that is procuring, you also need something that is going to scale. And sometimes I know that the startups, their funding is contingent on them being able to sign a contract with you as a procurer for a long term,
Yep.
but you don't know if they're going to be able to meet those requirements for you long term either.
Yep.
So it's not a simple problem
No,
to
no.
solve. So there are lots of different considerations for it.
No, and
appreciate
I
it's on
think
stage.
that's such a great example, right? And I think we do hear that. There are people who are like, no, I really want to go with this option, but XYZ. And I think my response in those moments is like, well, are the tentacles of your government that are responsible for economic development actually talking to the Ministry of Health? Are there actual conversations that are a bit more holistic? Because I also think the challenge that governments often get into is, well, our division is the procurement division. We're going to buy this. We're going to do this. We're going to centralize it. And the impacts of those decisions are actually going to impact the Ministry of Health or the hospitals or, the long-term care facilities or what have you. And so I think this is now an opportunity to truly be more multidisciplinary. In fact, our future prosperity is reliant on it. And it can truly be as simple as hopping on a call, getting multiple deputy tables together. And it's funny because I think sometimes like our job at CCI is to also connect the dots. As your podcast is connecting these dots, I feel like we do that within government. We're like, hey, have you talked to this deputy? Have you talked to this, ADM? Have you talked to this person working on this? And it's amazing the outputs that come from those conversations. Now, obviously, that's a starting point, and that's not the answer to everything. But we definitely need to think about it from a different perspective, and we definitely need to incentivize different behaviors. The thought that you wanted to go with that local option, like as a former civil servant, like you should have been in a place of support, from leadership. How do we make it happen? What were those regulatory barriers? How far, was that funding off? Like, could we make an exception, or could we create a 5-year plan for this company to eventually be procured? And I think that's the work. That's the real work, and it's messy and it's different. But I think this is the moment to think through things through that lens.
I like that. I like the asking, the question, can we change that? And I think the more people hear that, things are changing or that the door is open to those discussions to change something, like maybe that funding rule can change. Maybe that program to support entrepreneurs can change. Maybe they can adjust, what is actually needed. It's worthwhile having the conversation, because I think sometimes, as well, people think, well, that's never going to change, so why even try? Right? And so the more we can create a movement, as you say, towards opening the doors and making change, as you say, this is the moment to experiment and explore that. And I think that if you can come back later with any success stories as well, I think, or if you know of any now, I think that would be something really, really inspirational for people who think that that a change can't happen, but they see the change that needs to happen. And that's, we're not actually wired for change, but maybe we can become wired for change. Right?
No, and listen, I actually arrive from a very optimistic place. We actually have some companies who've had great success, scaling their ideas in one province and being connected through organizations like the Can Health Network. So this is a great initiative out of the federal government that's really trying to find opportunities to scale health and life sciences innovations across the country. And we actually have some examples of that within our own roster. And we see also just the ways that certain funds, like when it comes to federal funds, when they actually invest in, a Canadian company, how far it can actually go in growing them and scaling them and keeping them here, actually having that table stakes discussion with a company, being like, okay, like we'll invest a little bit more and we'll keep you here, or we'll help, grow your additional facility or what have you. So definitely happy to like color that in a more packaged way. And I think the reason that we're growing in membership is also a testament to how many companies really do want to stay in Canada and really do want to rise to the occasion and really do want to employ Canadians and build communities for the long term. So I'm really, really optimistic. And I just think that there's also a level of urgency right now that I think some people are really receptive to. And I think some chambers and government are, I don't think that people aren't receptive to it, but I think they're feeling immobilized, or they're feeling like, I don't know what I can do. I feel powerless in that moment. And what I would say to those groups of individuals, like reach out, we have ideas, we have a network, we have community, we have all kinds of people that are really just itching to collaborate and really just in earnest share their ideas, whether it benefits their direct business or not. I think this is really a moment where everyone's just ready to roll up their sleeves and provide direct lived experiences so that the next generation, or the next couple of years of entrepreneurs or community builders in the innovation space won't have to go through those same pain points. But the urgency is felt.
Yes, it really is. I can't wait to get this podcast out. I want to get it out like tonight, okay? Let's go. I love that. And so, bearing that in mind, we're looking at the bigger picture and what can we do? Do you have any sense of what like the roadmap could look like, and who can take action? What can their roles kind of be? And I mean, we can't speak to everyone right now, but just, give us a sense of what you guys are seeing.
Yeah. Look, elections are an opportunity to have discussions. Elections are about choices. Again, right now we are in probably one of the most pivotal elections that we'll ever experience in Canada for the next couple of years, and maybe even, within, the next decade. And so I think whatever anyone can do to just be more informed about what companies, what organizations, what communities are in people's backyards, what are the platforms that political leadership is actually putting out, like going a bit deeper, truly asking for more clarity, building just an awareness of where your local MP's office is and what are their top issues on the go. I think this is really a moment for building an awareness of what people are pushing for and advocating for, truly having more conversations, really getting out there, and whatever that looks like for you, whether it's just getting involved in a seminar that's being prepared in your area, or going as far as like trying to tune into, or just spending a little bit of time like accessing or subscribing to, let's say, even like Canadian news, news forums. Like I think this is also just such an important moment to subscribe to Canadian-owned information, Canadian perspectives. Like it's so important to kind of be aware of what's happening and understand that every vote matters, but also every perspective matters. And nothing is guaranteed. The next few weeks, Mark Carney, our current Prime Minister, has just called for a snap election, and things will change, at a rapid pace. But what won't change, I would hope, is Canada's real like appreciation for what we have and what we're growing, and really hoping to, to keep it here and to hold on to it. And so I think, just really remembering that this is a moment for action and discussion, and that everyone has an important role to play.
Excellent. And that policy can change.
Policy can change, totally.
We can continue to grow and scale. We can nurture all those startups and innovators and mature companies that are also innovating as well. That's a great message, I think, Skaidra. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you for some links as well that I'll post with this podcast.
Absolutely.
You brought a book with you as well today.
I did, yes. Yeah. I did want to leave one recommendation. So this is Recoding America, Why Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better. And prolific thinker when it comes to just building government capacity and really what we can be doing differently to sort of support civil servants for the digital age. And I really just want to leave you with this quote that really stuck out with me, is that, a revolution doesn't happen when society adopts new technologies. It happens when society adopts new behaviors. And so, I would just think about, again, how do we incentivize the right behaviors from our governments in this moment so that we're not only just adopting new technology, but we're also really thinking about the impacts that it has down the line so that we can course correct for years to come and kind of meet the digital moment. So I would recommend this.
Thank you so much for that,
Yeah,
Skaidra.
thanks.
We know that a lot of the behaviors and the structures and the policies that have gotten to us where we are today, it's not like we're saying rip everything out, but they're not necessarily the ones that are going to get us moving forward in the future.
Definitely.
And I think that however many lenses and the systems thinking that we can apply to this, the better it's going to be, for everyone. So thank you so much for all the work that you do at CCI. Thanks to CCI for continuing to raise these issues and help to arm us with the right thinking and information to make the decisions that we want to make for ourselves and for our country.
For sure.
All right.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Skaidra. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Wired for Change.